15 minutes or 20 minutes doing this. And it's maybe because it wasn't at the top of our mind, but now it's pushed us further back, right? And so we have to make that up, and maybe we're dropping out some breaks, or we're rushing through some other things that maybe we needed to spend a little bit more time on. So we need to be cognizant of where we can get off track. The other thing that I see happening is that sometimes we share too much information. This is one where I spend a whole bunch of, this is probably my biggest downfall. It's like I like to think I know a lot. I probably don't, but I want to go and I want to share as much information as I possibly can. And we have to look back and say, what do I need to share? What is just enough to get our participants to the specific goal that we're trying to achieve, right? Especially, whether it's you're a facilitator, whether you're the subject matter expert who's going in and talking about this, we didn't get our level of knowledge in one training session, right? And it may be something we're super passionate about, and you get talking and you love doing it, but it can become too much. So that's the other place. We gotta watch out for oversharing information. So that's kind of, when we look at it for the facilitator, that's what I kind of think of. When we look at time management for developing our training material or developing our course, what should we be looking at? First and foremost, we need to set ourselves up, and the facilitators and the learners, for success. So what does that mean? For me, it would mean, like, let's put together a well-structured facilitator guide, right? That it's set up as an at-a-glance document where we can clearly go through and show people what they're doing, when they're doing it, in the moment, where they can glance down, be back up in front of the monitor, or be back up in front of the class, or maybe it's on another monitor. And that's what I actually do right here, is like I have, the stream information on one side of my monitor, and I have my notes on the other side, so I can kind of go back and forth. And I hopefully line it up for the most part pretty well, where when I look off at it, it doesn't look like I'm completely looking away, but still I want it to be at a glance. I can get the information and then be right back up in front of the camera. All right, so we want to set them up, given that well-structured guidebook, they know what they need to be doing. The other important part of having a well-structured guidebook is that we remove the chances for open space. And what do I mean by that? So think about the time, if we ask a facilitator, tell me, tell the participants the 7 steps of, great customer service. But then we don't list off what those 7 steps are, right? And so maybe we run into the factor, maybe the facilitator only knows 3 and they're only going to cover 3. Or they know 5 and they're just going to cover those 5. But the flip side of that is, if we haven't written anything out, 1, they may skip that over, or 2, they may just fill that space with other information. It's a story. And that story now goes for 20 minutes, right? Or it's completely off base, and now we've lost our participants. We've lost their engagement because we've completely gone off the side. I like to think of this as how many times have you been like, I'm going to clean out this closet, right? Or I'm going to clean my basement or attic, and I'm going to, we got too much stuff. I want to just empty this out and give myself some clean space. And that clean space lasts for a little bit. And then guess what happens? Other stuff comes in and fills it, right? You take stuff out of your closet, guess what comes in? New clothes, right? New jackets or stuff from another place. So if we can keep our spaces delineated, but with the material that we need to effectively lead a course, we're going to be that much more successful. And so the other side for developers, we want to make sure we're providing time cues, right? And time cues, and I'm going to show you this in just a moment, but this is going to be things like, what's going on at the program level in terms of time, at the module level, at the lesson level, and even at the content block level. So let's take a look and see what I actually mean by that. So I'm going to flip over here, and we're just going to come into a Word document, right? So it's a sample facilitator guide I built. It's not, this isn't an actual training program, but it was more to drive the point home. So if I was to, let me get up here so we can see this. All right, so in in my material for this course, right? Like I've got a page of why do we do the programming, like listing off that, what the learning objectives are. But then I have a place, and here, let me zoom in so you can see it, right? What's the overall timing for this specific program? And I've written it down because, what's going to end up happening is I build this course, we lead this course maybe for the next 2 months, and then it goes on the shelf for a little while. And then in 6 months or in 8 months, we have to someone's coming back and they're leading this course again. Everything's written down. How long are we spending on certain things? Obviously this is prior to us making any edits into any revisions that may change up timing. But so I'm keeping it at the overall time level. But if I jump, I'm going to just kind of go through a couple of different pages. We're going to come back to that page in a moment. But then we're going to have, at the module level, so think of this as my terminal objective. I've laid out, here's how long you should be spending in module 1. So in this case, 1 hour and 15 minutes, and I've got it broken down into 2 lessons or 2 enabling objectives. And if I move through again, now at the lesson level, I'm providing, and for those who've sat through these things before, visual cue, right? We're driving action with these visual cues, and then headlines, and then information. So at my time level of the lesson, I'm showing you, all right, in this lesson, we've got 30 minutes. But I also have this thing called cumulative time. And this is a way I can help manage the time flow as I go through. Let me jump to the next page just so you can see it. So if we were going to go to the next lesson, so the first lesson was 30 minutes. When I get to lesson 2, and we're now showing cumulative time of 30 minutes, previously, let me go back real quick. Previously, it was at 0 hours, 0 minutes, because this is the first lesson within our first module. This is hour 1. This is the starting point. This is where we're jumping off from. So it's going to be 0 hours, 0 minutes. But when I get to lesson 2, I should have spent 30 minutes in my first lesson. And so looking at, if this was starting at 8 o'clock, I can glance at my watch and say, all right, it's at 8:30, we're right on track. But if I look at the clock and it should be, it's 8:45, I should have been 30 minutes. I'm already 15 minutes over. So cumulative time is a nice way I can kind of make sure I'm staying on track or figuring out quickly how do I get back on track so this doesn't veer even further off to the side. All right, so that's it looking at the lesson level. And in instructor-led training, what I like to do is I like to say, we've got 30 minutes. Here's what we have for this lesson. But then if I scroll down at specific items where we could get off track, I think I need to unzoom this. All right, so here. So when we get to my introductory activity, of that 30 minutes, I want you to spend 12 minutes, no more than 12 minutes, running this activity where we're introducing people and kind of hopefully getting them the beginnings of them and getting engaged. So in instructor-led training, ideally, my preference is to go and say we've got 30 minutes, and in the places where we get off track, activities, question and answers, case studies, breakout rooms, put in things like, put in time markers on those specific contents. So of that 30 minutes, we're going to spend 12 minutes doing this. You've got 18 minutes to figure everything else out, right? That's my general rule for instructor-led training. You can go another way, and when we talk about virtual in just a few moments, I will show you the other way you do it, or you can do it. But that's the idea of providing these time cues to help us stay on track. All right. So that being said, let's come back here, which was... All right, so that's pretty much where I was at for time management. Next, time trap number 2 is about the pace of virtual instructor-led training, right? So pace of virtual instructor-led training. I think I said that originally, but in case I didn't, we're talking virtual, not classroom instructor-led training. But so in regular instructor-led training, right? Generally, we had half-day sessions, right? Maybe you were going in for 3 hours, or it was a full day, or you're there for a week, and so there was a little bit more leeway, right? Maybe we can shave time off of lunches, or we can go just a little bit longer, or start a little bit earlier, and we're able to kind of, we got a little bit more wiggle room. In virtual, we're basically signing up for here's 60 minutes, here's 90 minutes. And so because they tend to be shorter, in the same amount of time, we're trying to get the same amount of information delivered in specific time periods is a better way to say it. So we really need to make sure we keep the momentum or keep the pace of our virtual instructor-led training. So it makes sure that we can cover all the information, in the time frame that we've allotted. And that's a lot of times it's, that's where instructional designers, based off the needs analysis that we've done, what can we achieve in this amount of time to get us to our learning objective, the performance outcome we want for this specific session, right? So we want to make sure we can cover all the information, but by keeping the pace, we also make sure that we're able to we have a better chance of keeping people's attention, right? The more we meander, the more people are apt, to go to their other monitor or pick up their phone. And I think my phone's generally right next to me, but it's not at the moment. But we could, where we lose them to some other item in the environment they're in, not in the virtual environment that we're leading the training. For the developer side of, keeping pace or keeping that momentum, same thing. We're looking to provide time cues. But instead of going the way we did in the classroom, where it was here's the overall lesson time, and at specific blocks or specific items that we tend to get off track, right? You got 30 minutes for your lesson, but 12 minutes for your activity, and you figure everything else out. I want the facilitator figuring less things out, or the producer figuring less things out in that virtual session, right? It's, I want things to be moving when they need to be moving. Could you consider it micromanagement? Possibly. I like to think of it as pace management. I think it's a friendlier term than micromanagement. But to kind of show you what this would look like is, let's pop back over here. So here is my second lesson in my example guide. This one I set up more for virtual, right? So again, this one, we're at cumulative time, 30 minutes, right? We're 30 minutes into the session, right? But now in this next one, we've got 45 minutes to accomplish everything that we need to. And I've actually gone in and I've put in a little note here that says time markers apply to all content blocks until you see the next time marker. So what I mean by that is, let's say, so this next, so on this next block, right? So I have got, where I'm showing a slide, right? When this slides up, it's going to be going for roughly a minute, right? And I've provided some cues. Basically, that 1 minute would cover any other content blocks beneath it until you reached another content block with another time marker. So in this case, that wasn't the case. But now, so after showing that slide, we're now going to be talking about some stuff, and here's the information that we're going to be talking about or saying. And now the next activity I come up, let's say it's a breakout activity, right? So it's 20 minutes. But in that 20 minutes, we're going to be covering the instructions. Then in this case, it's a case study that we're going to be doing in a breakout room, right? So all of that information is being covered, what's being said here and the breakout activity, and then the case studies, all of that's happening within 20 minutes. So that's what I meant by when I put in that, that time marker and everything underneath it till you see the next time marker. So 20 minutes until we come down till we get to the debrief activity, which we're going to be spending 10 minutes on, right? So in virtual, to keep the pace, I like to, 1 minute here, 3 minutes there, 2 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes. And again, it's not for micromanagement. It's so that they can sit there and make sure that we're staying on track. I mean, we've all sat through these training programs or virtual programs where time is meandered, right? We've got 45 minutes to do something, and you see what the objectives are, and maybe not everything's covered in that time period, right? So people are coming away with less than they expected. And I don't know which one of these is worse. I feel like the second one's worse than the first. That where we've got 45 minutes, 30 minutes we covered maybe half of what we needed to, and then everything's rushed in the last 15 minutes. And so people feel cheated, right? You gave me a little bit, but it was kind of crappy. And so I don't know which one's worse. They're both bad, so let's stay away from both of them. But that's the downside. And I think these time management issues, especially in virtual, is one of the reasons why people dread training, especially virtual training. Like time's a resource, right? We only got so much, and we don't know how much it is. So if people feel like their time's being wasted, not a great experience, not a great selling point for our L&D department, right? Ask the people over at the parent company of TikTok, where they fired their entire L&D department because all the employees felt their time was being wasted. Right? So we need to be cognizant of these things. And in virtual, we got to make sure we're keeping the pace. All right. So that's going to bring us to number 3. All right. Timing, time trap number 3, building timing that's too specific. So ideally what we want to do instead is keep our timing broad in our guidebooks. So think about this. So how many times have you built training materials and you've put in the time, like in the guidebook, like this is going to be happening at 8 a.m. and then at 8:15 we're going to be doing this, and at 10:30 this is what's happening. For somebody, I spend so much time working with people, helping them with their guidebooks and their training materials. I see this so often, and it's one of the worst things we can do. In our guidebooks, especially our facilitator guides, we want to keep our timing as broad as possible. What it allows us to do is we can now take our material and it can be used at multiple days, right? So when we make it too specific, what ends up happening is our guidebook is very good for that specific session, right? For that one session that it was built for, right? That it's starting at 8 o'clock, and at 8:15 we're doing this, and at 9:30 we're doing this, and then we're going to lunch at 11, and all those different things. But generally we don't build a training just for one time, right? It's going to be used another time. It's going to be used in another location, a different facilitator. What started this day, Monday at 8 a.m., the next time maybe it's not starting until Wednesday at 2 p.m. And we're now breaking it up, and instead of doing full day sessions, we're breaking it up into 4 half-day sessions. So when we make it too specific, what ends up happening is we then spend a lot of time editing for the other times. Every time you've got to build this training or you run this training, there's a lot of time that you go through, a lot of energy updating all the timing for that specific one, where if we keep it more broad, it takes 45 minutes to do this. It takes an hour and a half to do this. We can now apply those times. Obviously there's still time we have to do to put into agendas, but it's easier to work from a broader base than take a narrower base and make it more broad, or take a narrow base and change it to another narrow base. And the last one, let's say we've got a really specific guidebook and then we don't make the edits, right? So let's say our course is happening at Tuesday at 8 a.m. and then at 9 o'clock we're doing this, and at 9:15 we're doing that. And we did the course, it was successful, right? We all got thumbs up on it. When we go to run it again, and let's say it's another facilitator and it's starting at Thursdays and it's this one starting at 10 a.m. They get the guidebook. Well, all the timing's off in that guidebook, right? Right off the bat, we're gonna get pushback on the use of our guidebook because there's less value to them. They're going to have to go through and manually figure out all these times for themselves. Where if we keep it broad, it's easier to say, all right, 45 minutes, we're starting at 10 a.m. All right, 45 minutes, I'm done at 10:45, right? So keeping it broad gets better buy-in to our guidebooks. And now they're more apt to use our guidebooks, and now we have less meandering and we have less time management issues, right? So these things, they feed off each other. So let me pop back over to my example here to kind of show you this broad example. So if I back up a couple pages, right? So here, like at timing, this lesson's 45 minutes, right? And I did break down all those different pieces. the lesson before it was 30 minutes. But I'm going to come up, so in my guidebooks, I like to put into what I call the training at a glance, which is a high-level scope of all the modules or all the terminal objectives and what type of time frame they take to do. So in my first module called Time Traps, we're going to spend an hour and 15 minutes. We're not doing that today. This was just an example, right? So, I still like to try to keep these right around that half-hour mark. We may go a little bit over today, but that's the goal. But, hour and 15 minutes, here's what the name of the the module is, and then I provide a short description of how we're basically getting the facilitator how the facilitator or this training program is getting the participants to the objective of that specific module or terminal objective. Right? So in this case, I've got an hour and 15 minutes, I've got 50 minutes in module 2, I've got 2 hours and 15 minutes in module 3, and now I can apply those to specific days. I can apply it to specific time frames. If you were to ever choose to use our program, Leader Guide Pro, to build stuff out from this training at a glance in our program, I can go up and I can choose to extract, and instead of you spending all this time manually figuring out your agenda for a specific day and time, I can go up and I can extract out an agenda. And that little marker is just letting us know it's tallying up all our time markers to make sure it's okay. But in a moment here, I'm going to get a dialog box that's showing me all the different, there's my course, there's the modules, and all the lessons that were within it and their timing. But I could now come in and I could apply a course ID or anything like that. But maybe I want this to be, we're starting this on the 22nd, but it's going to start at 10:30 a.m. And so I'm going to lock all those things in, and now I can just draft an agenda. And when it's done, we get this action completed successfully, that you'll see here. And now it just kicks out based off the details I put in. Here is my agenda. Right? So at 10:30, we're at time trap number 1. And at 10:45, or at 11, we're at time trap number 2. And it's walking us through. So by keeping it broad, it's a lot easier to generate out agendas. You use our software, it's going to make it even that much easier. All right. So the last time trap that's out there is not knowing your time frames. So what do I mean by this? And this is more at the L&D department level than necessarily in building a specific program. But too often I see learning, and I'd say 99% of the time, I see learning and development departments not be able to say the time frame to create materials, right? How long does it take you to build a 90-minute virtual ILT session, right? And obviously everyone's going to be different, right? But there's going to be, there should be kind of a time for why am I drawing a blank? But there should be a range. To build a 90-minute session, it takes somewhere between, 8 hours to 14 hours or 8 hours to 12 hours. So what I believe L&D departments need to be doing, we need to track how long it takes us to build everything, right? So if I have to build an ILT, a VILT session, all right, I keep track. All right, so if I go in and it says, I'm starting at 8 a.m. and I've now worked for 4 hours and I'm, halfway done. Okay, great. I worked 4 hours. I keep track of that. And so at the end of my project and I'm done, right? I've gone, let's say we've done analysis and we've, gone through, design and development, all of those things, and I try to be as specific as possible. Like I spent 90 minutes building PowerPoints, or I spent, 2.5 hours on analysis, or whatever those things are. Tally all those things up and store the information. So that the next time I go and I build a VILT, let's say it's 90 minutes, and it took me, 2 hours to do analysis, and it took, 60 minutes to do my PowerPoints and all those things, I've got a record of data that I can start pulling from, right? And the more people that do this, the more information we have. Right? So when it comes time, and let's say sales, we've gone through and we've figured out that we need to build training, and, we kind of have our general idea of what needs to be done. And like, all right, this is going to be broken up into 3 90-minute sessions. On average, it takes us about 10 hours to build a 90-minute VILT session, right? So we're going to be looking at 30 hours of development time, right? And that's this general cost. We're able to do these type of things. So we have a better chance of, I guess, setting expectations not only for our stakeholders in the organization, but also for our content developers, right? So it gives us this area we can pull from for future projects. We can speak better to our numbers, right? If you want to speak the language of the C-suite, be able to speak to your numbers. So it helps us there. And it will help us find different trends. Like, hey, you know what? Sales has been all the training we've been doing for sales recently has been e-learning, or it's been, classroom based, and we're not seeing exactly what we need to, right? Maybe we need to look somewhere else. So just tracking information and being able to look to information is so important. It's also, for this, it helps us for coaching, for growth within our learning and development department, right? The one thing at this, because for tracking this information, we need to be reliant on our people to give us the true information back, right? So you don't want to be, hey, Pat, how come it took you 12 hours to build this where it only took, Sue 10 hours? So we don't want to use it for improvement plans, right? Like performance improvement plans. Like if we start doing this, people aren't going to track their numbers right. But if we want to use it for growth, like, hey, Pat, I saw this took 12 hours. Walk me through what you were doing, right? Or maybe we can start seeing where, certain people's strengths lie and other people's don't, and we can now start pushing them to the areas where they find more enjoyment. They do things better. Let's see. We have a question here from Teresa. Do you usually build in some buffer time, a couple of minutes for each time module? It's a great question. I would always give myself a little bit of time, right? Like, 1 minute, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. Like that 1 minute slide I was showing before, it's probably not going to take a minute, but I'm not going to be like 38 seconds, right? Just because to me, that's micromanagement. But if you think it's like, if you think it's going to be 45 minutes or 48 minutes, maybe you round it up to 50, maybe you round it up to 55 to give you the little bit of wiggle room. Like it doesn't hurt to have some wiggle room. No one's going to object if we were like, hey, we're done and you get to go home 5 minutes early. So I would definitely build in a little buffer. But those, that was really the big things. Those are the 4 time traps I see a lot of people hit on a daily basis. So it's, again, a lot of this is just spending some time thinking about what works for us, what doesn't work for us, and keeping track. Because if you're like me, if I don't write it down, I'm not going to remember it. It's in there, but trying to get to it, it's so hard. But as always, any questions that come up, about this, about anything that I can help you with, there's my phone number, if I can point correctly. There's my phone number. There's my email. Please reach out to me. And my one ask, if you haven't already, I'm so close. I don't know if you guys can see behind me, I've got this little digital clock that shows, what's going on my YouTube channel. For me to be able to brand this to my name, I've got to have 100 subscribers. It looks like I'm now at 89, so I'm 11 away. It also shows to the mothership, the bosses, that there's benefit in what I'm doing. So if you haven't had a chance to subscribe, I'd love it. Liking, commenting, that's always helpful because it drives just more viewership. And I just want to help more people get better at building guidebooks, at doing their training. But with that, I've already kept you a minute over your, our general 30-minute lunch. Have a great weekends, and I will see you guys next week. All right? Take care, folks.